Well, first of all, I would take violent umbrage at anybody who said he's just a blogger, for therefore he should die. Tell you what, meet me in the back shed. We'll talk about what's going to happen to you. Uh, no, it doesn't work that way, guys. Free speech is free speech. Okay, if you're an American and you claim to be an American, you claim to appreciate the Constitution of the United States. Free speech is free speech. Now, I know that Mr. Tatarsky, or Maxim Foman is his real name, is not an American citizen. But how dare you? How dare anybody who is born in this country say that just because he's a blogger who posts things that you find you object to, that this is a death penalty? God forbid you ever get on the other side of that and somebody decides that what you're posting, what you say, indeed what you think, is violently objective, and they target you for death. It's not how it works. Whether you agree or disagree with what he posted, this was a war correspondent. This is a man who went out and collected information and packaged it and delivered it to an audience. And it wasn't an insignificant audience. He had over 500,000 subscribers to his Telegram channel, and he was widely quoted. I will tell you straight up that I didn't agree with everything he posted, that I was not a fan of his analysis. But I read it. I followed him because I think it's important that you educate yourself with a wide variety of opinions. And he had an opinion that was influential. He was targeted by the Ukrainian intelligence services. This is becoming more and more clear. This was a targeted assassination by an organization that maintains the Mirotvorets hit list. He was targeted for saying things that the Ukrainian government found objectionable. Daria Dugina was assassinated by the Ukrainian special services. Now, she may have been the unintended consequence of their targeting of her father. We don't know exactly, but it appears that they were trying to kill him, but because she swapped out the automobile at the last second, she's the one that was killed and not him. But that doesn't change the fact that the Ukrainian government targets journalists for death. I'll just say that one more time so it sinks in. Later on, we start talking about, what the Russian government is alleged to be doing against an American journalist. The Ukrainian government targets journalists for death. They kill them. I'm on that list. That means that ostensibly I'm targeted for death. For what? For saying things that people find objectionable? Sorry, that's not a death penalty. And here's the worst part. The United States government funds this activity. The Ukrainian government has no ability to generate income right now. They're bankrupt. Their economy is trash. So they operate, based upon the donations made by the United States government. The United States government funds the Ukrainian intelligence services. We also fund the office of the presidency, Volodymyr Zelensky. His office operates an organization called the Center for Countering Disinformation. It is an organization that was created by the State Department with funding from the State Department. Its meetings are organized by the State Department. And in fact, in July 14th of last year, the State Department organized a meeting of the Center for Countering Disinformation where they published a blacklist. And on that blacklist were a number of Americans who were targeted as Russian propagandists. They were called information terrorists, with an emphasis on the terrorist, meaning that they should be treated as you would a terrorist. That's marked for death, by the way. And also war criminals. We should be arrested and all. Now, my name's on that list. Recently, I was elevated to the #1 spot on that list. I'm at the top. And that list is a feeder list to the Mirotvorets list. So if you're #1 on the Center for Countering Disinformation's list, you're high up on the Mirotvorets list. So I take this a little bit personally. And that's why I get a little angry at people that say, no, that's okay, kill them. Really? Really? You think that's a good idea to kill journalists? You kill people that you don't agree with. That's insane. And the fact that the U.S. government funds this, thereby implicitly supporting this, means that the U.S. government's in the business of killing journalists who dissent, who disagree with the official narrative. Now we can compare and contrast that with the treatment of the Wall Street Journal journalist who was arrested in Russia on charges of espionage. Now there's a difference, you see. When I write something and post it, you can disagree with it, but I'm not releasing classified information. I'm not spying. I'm not doing something that's harmful to the national security of any nation. This man was caught red-handed, allegedly, receiving classified information. He was in a town, Ekaterinburg, where there are some sensitive military-industrial facilities that produce objects that are essential to the special military operation. And he was digging into production levels to find out if the Russians were in fact producing particular kinds of munitions to the quantities claimed. Now, you can say that that's a legitimate journalistic question, but you don't get to go and get classified documents. That's against the law. You violate the law. You are technically a spy. Now, he may have an excuse, and he'll be brought before a judge, and he'll make his case. But there's no comparison whatsoever between somebody who was caught receiving classified information and somebody who was killed simply because the blog that he ran was unpopular in Ukraine. And to try and make a comparison between the two is absurd. It's just purely absurd. If you're a journalist, don't go collecting classified information. It's illegal here, and it definitely is illegal in Russia. It's illegal in just about every nation there is. There's no journalistic pass. Hi, I work for the New York Times. Hi, I work for the Wall Street Journal. Therefore, I get to see classified information from people unauthorized to do it. Now, in the United States, we do give journalists a pass. We know, for instance, Edward Snowden released extraordinarily sensitive documents to the press, and the press published some of these. We know that Julian Assange did the same thing. Now, Assange, because he's not an American citizen, he's being prosecuted for executing what would ostensibly be First Amendment rights. But notice that no New York Times journalist, no Washington Post journalist, no Guardian journalist is being prosecuted for publishing the same information that Julian Assange published. This is an assault on free speech. That's what the United States does. That's what Great Britain does. We assault free speech. Julian Assange is in prison right now, the 1,000th day of his imprisonment in Belmarsh, a maximum security prison in London, where he is literally dying. I would advise everybody listening to go watch the documentary film Ithaca. It's a sobering movie based upon the support that Julian Assange is receiving from his family, from his father, John Shipton, his brother, Gabriel Shipton, and from his wife, Stella Assange. It's heartbreaking to see what's being done to him. But every American, every Brit should understand there but for the grace of God go you. And if Julian Assange is successfully prosecuted, that's the end of free speech in America. Because if you ever publish something that the U.S. government takes umbrage to, and can find a potential to say you have published classified information, that's how you're going to be treated. That's how we treat Julian Assange. The Russians aren't putting anybody, they're not torturing anybody to death. Julian Assange is being tortured to death by the British, and he will be tortured to death by the Americans when he comes here, if he is indeed extradited. There's no American journalist in Russian prison being tortured to death. There are people serving time for espionage. They've been found guilty in a court of law. We can sit here and say that's not true. That's a trumped up charge, whatever. We did the same thing to that poor Russian girl, the redhead who had the NRA fixation and all this stuff. We put her in jail.
Butina, right? Marina
Butina. Put her in jail for being an unregistered foreign lobby. She didn't commit espionage, but we treated her like that. So please get off your high horse if you're an American. Okay, there is a double standard here. We arrest people, we torture. Ask her how she was treated. Ask her what the Bureau of Prisons does. And if you want to put a blind eye to what they do, I'll tell you, they do it. If they're accused of doing it, they do it. Corrections officers are scum personified. These are people who are out of control. There's no checks and balances. They murder prisoners every day in America. They abuse prisoners because nobody cares about them. They're locked away and forgotten. And Maria Butina was put into that system, and she was sexually assaulted by Bureau of Prison authorities. She was put in solitary confinement. They harassed her. They tortured her. For what? Because she failed to register in her lobbying efforts on behalf of the National Rifle Association. Okay, so I really don't want to hear anything about this. I'm not saying that the Russians treat their prisoners any better than we do, but the fact is, we have a gentleman, Mr. Whalen, a former Marine, who was accused of gathering information in an unauthorized fashion. He's currently serving an espionage sentence. We have this new Wall Street Journal journalist who is probably going to be prosecuted. And if you're prosecuted in Russia for espionage, you're going to be found guilty of it. And he's going to do a jail time for what? For committing a crime, a real crime, not a faked up, trumped up crime. But now we come back to Maxim Fomin. He was murdered, assassinated by the Ukrainian government with the implicit approval of the United States government. So the United States government is in the business of assassinating journalists that they don't agree to. And that's just straight up truth. And, I take it personally because I may be traveling to Russia in the near future. And if that happens, is the U.S. government going to allow the Ukrainian government to target me? Now, the Russians will say, we'll protect you, we'll take care of you. But that's not the point. It shouldn't be about protection. Journalists should not have to have protection traveling and doing their job. The fact that they have to have protection means somebody's trying to kill them, which means somebody doesn't appreciate free speech. Now, we know the Ukrainian government is that kind of government, but the United States government is funding them, is supporting them. Is silent as they target Americans. And that should be disturbing to everybody.
Indeed. You brought up so many great points. I mean, I remember reading recently, this is during the Ukraine conflict over the last year or so. Miss Butina, Marie Butina, wrote an incredible piece in Russia, well, formerly Russia Today, RT, on what she experienced in prison. And I think she penned an open letter to Angela Davis talking about what she witnessed, not just with what she went through, but also with a lot of the mainly Black female prisoners that experienced the conditions she did. And it changed her, almost like her entire worldview. So, not only this, though, what you were saying about the Wall Street Journal journalist, I'm not even going to say his name, because honestly, at this point, what this feels like is just utter hypocrisy, because Julian Assange was provided information, right? And you said, Scott, journalists are protected. If you are provided information, you're not collecting the information. You're not actively getting it. People are giving it to you, and you're releasing it to the public as part of journalistic duty. That's what Julian Assange did, and his team. And now he's being tortured in a witch hunt. This journalist was literally doing the espionage. it's different. And yet Julian Assange is being charged with the Espionage Act, and we'll see what happens to this journalist. But the treatment of them is so different. And then you have, of course, Mr. Tatarsky, who was just blatantly killed. Where do you place these attacks by Ukraine? Because the SBU is implicated. That's what Russia is saying. Even the Western media and U.S. officials are saying that there is Ukrainian involvement. I think the woman who gave the bomb to Mr. Tatarsky is like a follower of Mr. Navalny, who prominent Russian opposition, I say, but really a Russian opposition figure with not much popularity in Russia, but a lot of support from the United States. Where do you place these attacks on journalists? I mean, literal assassinations and attempts to silence critics of Ukraine and critics of U.S. and NATO support for Ukraine. Where do you place this in the overall scheme of the war right now?
A tragic distraction. It's going to have zero impact on Russia. Russia is operating in accordance with a plan. That plan is being executed effectively. And the Russians aren't going to allow themselves to be distracted by something like this. It would be foolish for Russia to overreact to this. I mean, it's tragedy what happened. They will investigate. They will hold those responsible accountable. But, there's people out there saying that Russia should do this, do that, do this, do that. That means that Russia would be allowing Ukraine to dictate the pace of the battle, that Russia is so immature that when something of this nature happens, it overreacts and therefore loses whatever initiative, et cetera, that it had. Ukraine blew up the Crimea bridge. Russia could have used that as an excuse to target Zelensky, target the Ukrainian government, start killing leaders. They didn't. Why? Because they understood that the ideal way this war ends is to get Zelensky to come to the negotiating table. And if you kill him, he can't come to the negotiating table. If you kill him, you don't know who's going to replace him. You don't know what's going to happen. Right now, the Russians are dealing with predictability. That's one of their favorite words. They would like predictability. And Zelensky provides a predictability factor in terms of, achieving a negotiated outcome, which is what Russia has wanted all along. People forget that phase one of this special military operation wasn't, an effort to seize Kiev. It was an effort to pressure the Ukrainian government to the negotiating table. And they succeeded. Within a week of initiating this conflict, Ukraine began meeting with Russian negotiators in Gomel in Belarus. There were 3 meetings in the first, week or so of the conflict that led to a 4th meeting in Istanbul on the 1st of April. And that meeting should have produced a ceasefire agreement that would have brought the war to an end. That's what Russia was seeking. Instead, Boris Johnson flew into Kiev, told the Ukrainians to not do that, to shelve it. And now we have a war that's cost Ukraine hundreds of thousands of lives, tens of millions of displaced people, $1 trillion of infrastructure damage, all because the West wasn't happy with the peace deal that Russia was putting on the table back then. Well, I mean, people would die to have that peace agreement today, because it basically just said that Crimea is Russia forever. Lugansk and Donetsk will be independent. Ukraine can't join NATO, but pretty much everything else gets to say the same. Imagine how many people would be alive, how many families would be intact, how many children would have fathers, how many wives would have husbands, how many sisters would have brothers, how many parents would have sons. But now that's not the case. And Ukraine is locked in a death match with a larger opponent who can't be beat. And Ukraine is being urged forward, even though the chances of victory are non-existent. They're being urged forward by their masters in the West, NATO, etc. Ukraine is a proxy of NATO. They're carrying out a war on behalf of NATO against Russia, and they're being destroyed in the process. This is this is a tragedy. But Russia wanted this war to end. Russia wants this war to end, and that's why we don't see this kind of escalation. So the Russians aren't going to overreact to the murder of Maxim Fomin and Mr. Tatarsky, just like they didn't overreact to the murder of Darya Dugina, who was the daughter of a very influential Russian philosopher, Alexander Dugin. They didn't overreact to the attack on the Crimea Bridge. They don't overreact to these Ukrainian drone strikes against, Russian strategic bomber bases in Engels. Again, your average American's going, well, I mean, come on, Russia's flying out of there. That should be. You guys understand that that's the equivalent of somebody attacking a B-52 base in Omaha, Nebraska, or another, any other in North Dakota. We wouldn't allow it to happen, guys. That's a strike on our strategic nuclear. And so Russia could have overreacted. That's literally one of the triggers for release of nuclear weapons. But Russia didn't overreact. Russia's not in the business of overreacting. Russia's in the business of managing escalation. And that's what they're doing right now. So I don't see Russia overreacting to this. I do see them carrying out investigation, collecting names. Russia is definitely one of the nations where revenge is a dish best served cold, and Russians have a habit of serving this dish ice cold. So they'll wait as long as it needs, and then they'll take the appropriate response to people. And it is what it is. You want to run with the big dogs. Understand that sometimes you have to pay the big dog price. And Ukraine is running with the big dog, the biggest dog out there. And Russia's taking names, and there will be an accounting. You don't get to go around and murder Russian journalists in St. Petersburg and think that there's not going to be a consequence. But the consequence isn't going to be the kind that changes the trajectory of this conflict.